this is really technical for me, people, but here's like some of his magazine covers and stuff that he's got. I mean, this guy is just I'm just so thrilled that you're here, Tom, because it's it's an honor for you to take the time for our little camera club. Um, Tom, by the way, has started out as a journalism student, and also does a lot of personally does a lot of adventure stuff, rock climbing and uh, kayaking and stuff like that. And here I am, I'm talking about you, Tom. I mean, you're more than welcome to take over for me. But I mean, really cool when you're the guy, with the rope and you're climbing and you're able to photograph the other climbers. And I'm assuming that's just kind of how all things started. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I can, if you want, I'll just jump right into it. I have a couple of
Absolutely.
images, but
You
yeah,
got, oh, let me say one thing for all of you first, in case you don't have it, Tom. Tom's website is tombolphoto.com, and it's such an amazing, useful website. First off, the homepage video is a must watch. It's only like 5.5 minutes, so you can watch it. Also, he's got a blog on there that's got a lot of great information, including the warmest socks out there. So you gotta watch that. Also, things like creative reflections. I mean, this is a Nikon guy, okay? So I already like him because he's a Nikon guy, but because I have to deal with all of this Canon, all the Canon guys, and then I gotta kind of like do everything in reverse because it's Canon. So the fact that Tom's a Nikon already scoring all this stuff, but his blog is not necessarily Nikon. It's, I mean, he's got stuff about Topaz and just creative things. And so please go and look at his blogs, because that's very useful too. And now I'm going to let you take it away.
Before you start, Tom, let me just ask everybody to please stop your video and mute your microphone until Tom is asking for questions. Thanks, everybody.
all right.
Go ahead,
Thanks.
Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go, gang. Yeah, I will just throw this right out on the front end, you guys. Thanks so much for having me. I absolutely love hanging out with other photographers. Oh my God, when you guys all get off there, the image of me is so big now, it is just horrifying. Let me screen share so I don't have to see myself or I'll really get wigged out. All right, let's see here. Can you guys all see that? Are we screen sharing? I'll just, if I don't hear anything, I'll assume that
No,
we're
looks good. Looks gorgeous.
Okay, good. Yeah, and so yeah, thanks a ton for having me, you guys. I'm super excited. I know I'm talking to an educated photography audience, and so I just like to present things that I've learned or see or are learning through teaching others, and maybe you get something out of this. I mean, I always am really self-conscious about, these guys have heard and done so much that, I want to give you new ideas. So that's really my goal tonight is, it's that 15 techniques. That's just a different way of talking about, we're going to look at creativity tonight. I'll give you some really hard, fast set, like try this and get that. And then I'll give you more ideas that are a little broader and more personal to you and your style of work. But this is who I am. I started like we were just talking about. I mean, my career story in like a minute or less was I was a journalism major way back. I won't date myself, but let's just say it was in the middle 80s. And I was a climbing guide. So I got out of school and I was shooting some assignments and little paper stuff. I mean, nothing exciting, but I was so fixated on being in the mountains, paddling, climbing, whatever the case may be. That brought me up to Alaska. I started guiding around the globe in the Himalayas and on Denali and all this stuff. I mean, it's like the dirtbag climber that had a camera, but really didn't know how to use it. And that was, and you guys, especially talking to an evergreen crowd, you can totally relate to this. That was pre-climbing gyms in every little town, and Patagonia was not even really around. It was more like Chenard Equipment, and this guy Yvonne was going to start a company, and it was just so fringe. So my timing was just really good. I was a climber that had a camera, and then the outdoor industry exploded. And I was living in Alaska pretty much in my truck at the time. And I started getting calls from these, like I was so out of my element. I'm like, I'd done assignments, but then you get big assignments and you have no idea like how to put that together and how does this work, and the money and the models and the liability and permits and blah, blah, blah. And that was it. It just, I was in the right place at the right time. And I got hired initially because I was a backcountry person that had a camera. And then maybe down the road, eventually it was, hey, this guy knows how to take photos, so we'll hire him because he's a photographer and he happens to know how to hang on a rope. So anyway, that was that. So tear sheets, just different stuff. I should point out too, just I'll try to give you the personalized idea on some of this stuff. So I don't photograph climbing as much as I used to. Honestly, I'm just older. It's harder. There's younger guys that are doing fantastic work. A big thing, a transition for me for sure was leaving the expedition style work and being like, you know what, I can't spend 30 days over in Nepal or wherever. I was getting so much more opportunity photographically that wasn't so hardcore, but I still dabble in that. But the best news was I have a son, and of course he got into climbing. And so this ad we did for SanDisk, that's my kid. And so it's great when your kid is like your model, because it's like, son, go climb that route again. If you want to eat dinner tonight, you will do that again and again. And so I never told SanDisk that was my kid, but he became a really good climber. And so that worked out well. So anyway, this is me back in the day. Gotta love the hairdo, climbing big mountains, 8,000 meter peaks, stuff that I don't want to do anymore. It just would get way too beat up doing it. But it put me in the right place in the right time for pretty unique mountain imagery, which it was, I actually fondly still, I think back to a lot of that in places I know I'll never get back to because it was just way too extreme. So this is what it looks like a day in the life for me now. Is we do a lot of different types of work. Some of it is editorial, some of it's commercial, a lot of it is involved in the photo industry, lighting. You'll see lighting is a common theme here tonight. This was a trip we did a few years back to Bhutan. We were over there for Elinchrom. If you guys are, I know probably a number of you are portrait folks and maybe use Profoto or Elinchrom, I don't know. But anyway, it was so much fun. The Buddhist folks over there, the Bhutanese, oh my gosh, just magical. So anyway, well, tonight, it's like, how can we get better, right? That's the $1 million question. And I know that everyone probably has different genres that they shoot. Somebody's a wedding shooter, a portrait, an event shooter. So it's so hard to come up with a presentation that kind of has principles that can go across the board. But that's what I'm going to try to do. I really mixed up the images I put together in this to hit the landscape folks and hit the portrait people, and not a lot of food photography in this one, but you guys will see. So let me give you some ideas here on maybe thinking outside the box a little bit. And maybe you know all this, but I'll do my best to maybe give you some new ideas. So everyone's heard of this, right? We all know the exposure triangle: shutter speed, aperture, ISO. You learn that kind of 101, and we all know how to make the exposure. So I started thinking hard about this and always trying to see the bigger creative picture in a different way. And because I teach a lot, I'm always trying to figure out a way to encapsulate that into something that maybe can give a framework for somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience. So I came up with this idea. I call it the creative triangle. And it made a lot of sense when I started to think about it. It's like, well, first you got to know how to use your camera. You got to know the tech, right? You have to know how to operate the camera. What shutter speed does this? What ISO does this? Depth of field, f-stop, all that. That's the tool. And then there's your knowledge of graphic design, like what are those color relationships and how does a horizontal line affect the viewer versus a curved line? And so there's that. And then the third part of this is, so you got the tech and you kind of know the building blocks of design and how to put that together. And then it's your vision. And that's really where you apply your own magic to the bigger picture. Is you have those two base elements, but really the vision part of this is what makes you who you are. I think you can learn a lot of the other two, and you can, and certainly technology changes, we learn new things. Vision is one of these things that never really ends. And a big theme I would throw out to you guys tonight, and why I'm convinced I get so excited talking about this stuff. It's like it's day one out of journalism school for me. I mean, I still just get so excited thinking about creating this, and the vision part, it evolves, it goes this way and that way, and maybe you shoot like COVID, right? How many of us have done different things during the pandemic? Like, I can tell you more about that, but it just changes how you all grow. And hands down, I never think you ever get it all right. Right. I don't know if some of you guys know Joe McNally. I co-teach with Joe and some stuff, and he's definitely an idol for me. He's a lighting guy. I love that about him. But man, he's so humble, and he's like, the creative process never ends. It's like you get a few things right along the way, but you never really get there. And I thought about that. And I'm like, it's so true. It's like if you feel like you got it, then you really are kind of putting the blinders on. So let me keep moving. I'm going to go over just a few basic ideas related to that creative triangle, and then I'll jump into 15 steps. And they're just, some of them are concrete, like do this, and others are a little bit broader. So we'll go there. Now, one thing that I know that I remind myself all the time, and I think a lot of us start to take it for granted, or we just kind of lose sight with it. At least I know I do. What is this medium that we work in? Oh, I'm a photographer. Well, what is photography? And it's a fascinating way to compress time or freeze time. Think about this. It's like all this is going on, you hit the shutter, and that moment is recorded. And there's a lot of unique parts to that are so unique to photography that we can capitalize on a creative level. You can compress time, right? I can shoot a 10-minute exposure and have it rendered as a single picture. That's a pretty wild concept. 10 minutes of time in a single slice. So, and then of course there's the editorial, the journalistic, and other venues here that stretch out. But I think it's important to kind of remember just a little bit about that. I know that's probably not on everybody's radar. It's like, I get it. I spend all this money on camera gear. Let's go do photos. But I know for me, I got to keep asking questions so that I continue to go in the right direction. So freezing time or shaking the camera with a slow exposure, creating abstract art, creating your own light. Here's one for you. So COVID, bored out of our minds down here in Fort Collins. So we got glitter paper, cut a little hole through a piece of yellow glitter paper, shot through it with the 70-200, and had a speed light backlighting this sunflower. So the sunflower is in deep shade and flat as a pancake. We're like, let's make some magic with light. And we added glitter paper to rim out so that yellow, you can't even tell it's glitter paper, but honestly, a lot of it's that along with that backlight speed light. So that kind of technical solution is very exciting to me. And then there's the travel, the storytelling components, the graphic components, complementary colors, all these different kinds of things. A few other things that are worth noting. Everyone knows we all deal with, getting it right or getting it wrong in a different way. I know that I've had to just accept the fact I'm going to make a ton of mistakes. And, I think everyone has a different tolerance to this. And for me, just letting go of it and moving forward has been really helpful on a creative level. And it wasn't easy to do initially. This is a shot. Oh, somebody said the UP. So I had an assignment. This is like 30 years ago. It was to circumvent Isle Royale in a sea kayak. And this is one of the photos from the shoot. And I'm looking at this going, oh my God, this is like a disaster. What was I thinking? The lighthouse needs perspective control. It's uneven polarization. It's like a disaster. All right, so I'm going to move forward. Hopefully we'll figure this stuff out. And a lot of my career, especially early on, was doing silly things related to adventure sports, trying to figure out ways to get perspectives. POV shooting is huge in adventure, point of view. Now, this is long before GoPro and all the little action cams. It was always like, a monster F5 or some huge film camera strapped to my head, or, we're digital here. But so I would come up with these silly ideas. Some of them worked. Sometimes this one, the camera actually snapped off the front of my boat. But, live and learn, right? You get a couple frames out of it, and then you just go with it. other barriers for me, and I say this just because I want to tie this into where we go, but people photography was not my number one passion in the world, but I realized that I love being in the mountains, and so much of mountain culture and the people there were really a part of the environment, even though I kind of separated the two when I was a guide. But as I became a photographer and traveled a lot, I realized that I had to shoot people. I had to photograph people because just like an animal living in the forest, so was a Nepalese porter in his little village. And so I turned this leaf on people photography. Who knew? So a lot of failure there until I finally started to get at least a few things right with the people photography. So if there's one theme too that you guys, hopefully you can maybe take this back on your own self. I'm a huge believer in getting outside your comfort zone. And that may be with a technique, but it also may mean photographing something you'd never photograph. I'm a huge believer in shooting portraits is going to help me be a better landscape photographer, and things that you can't necessarily connect, but just the bigger creative picture, maybe some of the skills, the camera craft crosses over. But I look back on my career now, and when I photograph a bird, I'm looking at it thinking about what lighting ratio I have going on, and is it cross-lit? What's the transition between highlight and shadow? And I mean, it makes me photograph birds differently because I'm a portrait guy. So that's something to think about. So if you're wondering what a day in the life looks like down here in Fort Collins in the hot, summer area, oh my God, I want to be in Evergreen. This is a typical day in the Bowl household. Our neighbors think we're nuts. We had an assignment one time, and talk about failure. They had a new light, and this flash could pop 20 flashes in a second. So if you got a camera that can shoot 20 frames a second, it's like a disco light. This thing can do that. And so we were hired. The concept was we had to show how fast the burst of this light could render things. And of course, the only thing that we could think of was water. And so I told my wife, I'm like, I got this great idea. You're going to get on the roof of the house with a hose. I'm going to hire this amazing model. We're going to have these lights just lighting them up like a smoky German disco, just going boom, 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 boom. And it's going to be the best shot ever. And my wife's like, I'm on. She's a climbing guide too. So the roof thing, not an issue. But meanwhile, we're in suburbia. So people are driving by and they're like, oh, there's the Bols. What's going on? Well, this is what they saw. We got this guy that looked like, Wolfman, like Hugh Jackman. He's this big cut model guy. And my wife is like, this is the best. I like this model. Let's hold on to this. So she's pouring water all over this guy. But, this is going for a national ad. It looks like the guy wet his pants. I mean, this is disaster time. I'm like, okay, embrace failure. That's what I'm preaching. I got to do what I say everyone else should do. So then we figured it out. It's like, instead, let's give them a new set of pants. Let's get them out there and let's hit them from all directions. And we'll shoot 20 pops a second as the first waves of water come in. And then this is the shot that we got. So he still looks dry. That's because in about a half second, he's going to be soaked. But we got the lights to do what we wanted. We froze the water. But anyway, it's not all wine and roses. You make tons of mistakes. That's okay. Go with it. And along that same line, I cannot say this enough. I've had many times in my career where I've walked into a portfolio review in New York or had an editor looking at my image, and it was hammer time on Tom. Like, what are you thinking? Wow, never seen this before. All these kind of cryptic ways of saying your work sucks. It's like, oh my God. But I have a real thick skin. I'm like, been there, coming from a climbing background, it's like, whatever, I'm not going to die. It's like, okay, you don't like my work? That's fine. I've had more stressful things in my life, but stick to your guns. I had so many people telling me back in the day that lighting climbing looked too commercial. Well, it's lit. I'm like, yeah, it's supposed to be lit. Well, that's not natural. I'm like, I'm not trying to do natural. And there was other guys too. Don't get the idea. I didn't invent this. There were some other terrific photographers right around that early 80s or early 90s time where lighting was starting to be kind of introduced into the outdoor realm. And I'm like, you know what? I can't help myself. I'm going to keep lighting climbers. I just think it's cool. It's a different style. Who cross lights a rock climber 40 feet up a cliff? I mean, I'm not going to aim a light from the base and just shoot light at it. I'm going to elevate to a softbox and a gridded light and do something interesting. Well, in the end, that was I didn't know it at the time. I followed my own path and I just wanted to do it. And it wound up being something that I got hired to do over and over and over again. So stick to what it is that you love to do. There may not be a financial, maybe you guys aren't doing this for a living, but whatever even if it's just an interest or whatever, take feedback and move forward. I mean, I can't say that enough. So we all got to keep shooting here. The more you know, the more genres you experiment in, the bigger your vision becomes. Remember the top of the triangle here. Shooting in different areas and trying new things just opens doors. So now there's another thing that we all have to come to grips with. I'm sure you guys have all heard this before. There's the left brain and the right brain. And so the right brain is that super creative person that just seems to point a camera at something and it looks amazing. And then the left brain's kind of like, cross the T's, dot the I's. And I just love this picture. This was on a workshop where we actually went to the backcountry on this. We were photographing Denali from an area that doesn't get photographed a lot. And I love this shot. The guy on the right, man, on a tripod, f/16, perfect exposure. Just, it's going to be perfect. And then you have this person on the other side. She set up her tripod. Nah, it's better 6 inches lower. I'm going to squat down here. And she's going to get a much more creative, interesting shot. It's just the perfect validation of this right and left brain. But we got to understand kind of where you fall in that in order to know where to go and where not to. I mean, if I give myself self-critique, I mean, I've never considered myself super creative, quite honestly. I mean, I'm a technician. I'm very persistent. I think that helps a lot. But I've had to try hard to be more creative and learn things. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about talking like to groups and just sharing what I've learned that's helped me. So the more that you know, the more that you see, right? That's a good quote. The more you know, the more you can see photographically. This is a guy in an outhouse in Alaska. I'm not thinking that. I'm thinking I'm coming back here at twilight, gonna set my white balance to incandescent, put a speed light in here with an orange gel, crack the door. This is going to be the coolest looking outhouse I've ever seen in my entire life. So that vision part of that triangle, you always have to be thinking. And the more that you've experimented and tried and know, you have more ideas. A duck on a pond, the infamous mallard, right? Sleeper. Well, think about this. What can I do to this mallard? Maybe I'm going to wait till he flies. I'm going to put on a flash on my camera. You guys know shake and bake or dragging the shutter. So you shoot at a slow shutter speed with camera movement, but the flash duration is so fast, it'll render your subject for a moment. This is what a mallard can look like on that same pond. I just know how, I just have to have an idea of how to do that. So you guys get that. All right. Well, give me something I can do. Some of these are really like simple point A, point B. Some of you are going to know them. Some of them, I hope you don't. Well, I'll just move forward. One other thing I forgot to mention, part of what I did with this talk tonight is I have self-assignments for you guys to do. I won't be calling, I won't be shoveling your driveway, but I love it when somebody gives me a mission. It's like, Tom, go do something interesting with this, or have you ever tried this technique? So I'll throw these out and you guys can say, hey, I'm going to try that, or like, what's this guy thinking? He's nuts. Everyone knows the rule of thirds. This is basic composition 101, right? How many people, when was the last time you used the Fibonacci spiral to compose a shot? Now, you're all saying, wait a second, this is going way back, the golden rule, all that fun stuff, the phi grid. I have to tell you, we have taught hundreds of folks this pandemic year online, on Zoom, right? That's how we all operate. And the feedback we have received from folks on the Fibonacci has been incredible. I'm like, I thought everyone knew the Fibonacci. Nope, maybe a few of us have heard of it. None of us have tried to use it. Oh, and did you know that when you use the crop tool in Lightroom and Photoshop and toggle with the O key, you can bring the Fibonacci up. So this is what it looks like. It's basically a mathematical formula that creates this perfect swirl kind of spiral. You can think of it in many different areas in nature. Think of a nautilus shell, or you're getting the galaxy, or I mean, it just shows up already in nature. And then it took an Italian mathematician to kind of put a label on it. But it's an interesting thing. So if you look at this, you're saying, I'm going to put my subject kind of where the curl is. And by the way, this can be flipped upside down, right side. So you can move where this applies in terms of what quadrant. But it's definitely not a normal way to compose. It feels a little out there, but it is incredible on what it can do. So here's this is my backyard. So I used to guide on Denali, and I talk about snowstorms. I can give you some stories. But this is if you get a clear day going into Denali, this is what you're going to see. It's not always clear, as we all know. In fact, you're hoping for a day like this. I always love this picture. Of course, I'm totally biased here. I love this mountain. But then I put the Fibonacci on. I'm like, hey, what do you know? It actually makes sense. It's, I always thought it was just kind of balancing out with that road on the right side, but, maybe there is something to this Fibonacci. Other images like a spiral staircase, it's a logical fit. It makes a lot of sense. But then you do shots like this where I wouldn't have necessarily put this guy so low in the frame, but it works great with the Fibonacci. So I know it's a slightly different way, and maybe some of you have tried this. Now, we all know the rule of thirds, right? That even quadrants, it's a classic tool that we all use and still use today. It's a great way to kind of get you oriented, and maybe you decide to do something totally different. I'm not bashing the rule of thirds at all. I'm just hoping that you've never tried the Fibonacci, and that tomorrow morning, in between shoveling your driveway, you find some old images, you get into Lightroom and Photoshop, engage the crop tool and toggle into the Fibonacci and see what happens. We had people that had taken images that were, they were in their files for years. They ran them through a Fibonacci composition and they turned into amazing shots. Some of them were disasters. This isn't the silver bullet. It's just something to try. So, and as you guys all know, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. These are guidelines, right? An image like this is not a rule of thirds shot. This is a beautiful sky. I'm not going to worry about the Fibonacci, the rule of thirds or anything. I'm going to put my horizon line way low on the bottom because I like the clouds. So obviously it's just an idea. So one of your self-assignments, so you choose, would be to experiment with the Fibonacci. It's cool. You might be surprised. And of course, we know that rules are just guidelines. They're not meant to give you, the perfect image, but it's just another way that might help us get to where we want to go and what we're trying to communicate. Okay, compositional subtraction. This one's easy. You guys, I'm sure the landscape photographers are nodding their head in the group. It basically comes down to this question. Is there a reason for this to be in my image? And if there's not, then take it out, or it's probably detracting from what it is really the subject in the photograph. Does it need to be there? I bet you a number of you guys have been over to Ridgeway and Dallas Divide in the fall. So pretty over there. Just can't, it's like every year, you just got to go take this picture, even though you've done it for like 20 years. But this is how critical I get with my work. It's like, okay, I like the shot, but that cloud in the upper left corner, it's a bright white area. The eye is going to go there. There's bright color, or it's bright and there's contrast. It's going away. To me, that is taking away from this image. Now, whether you do it in post or you let the scene change, I mean, that brings up a whole nother idea of, is it, post-production or in the field? I'm definitely, if I can do it in the field, my preference is always behind the camera, but of course, we live and breathe in Photoshop here, and oftentimes your in use determines what's acceptable and not in terms of how you edit an image. Same idea here. That strip of wood at the bottom has no place in this shot. It's a minor oversight. Now, it's a simple fix in the computer, but wouldn't it be nice to do it in the field? It's really about texture, pattern. That's what this image is about. Don't need to see the bottom. Same idea here. There's these beautiful granite boulders with orange lichen. This is in Tasmania, this amazing magical bay that we wound up on. I couldn't stand these rocks in the lower part of my frame. The problem was there was absolutely no way to get an angle that I could crop it out in the field. So I took these out in post. Now it's the rule of odds 3 is always better than 2. The eye has a pathway and tension through the shot. Anyway, doesn't need to be there. Now, let me give you guys some ideas on motion. I had somebody tell me, they're like, oh my gosh, the long exposure waterfall, oceanscape, river is so overdone. And I thought about that, and I'm like, I don't really want to like put a value judgment on a style. To me, if that's what I need to do, then I'll do it, whether everyone's doing it or no one's doing it. I think it's a slippery slope when you start saying, it's overdone. I always really try to stay true to what I'm trying to say, and I would encourage you guys to do that too. There's so much content out there, as you guys all know, and everyone is an expert. Whatever, everyone means well, but I just think you have to put a little bit of a decipher on some of that. Well, here's an idea on motion. I'm not interested in whether it's making an image mysterious or moody. I'm interested in what shutter speed affects motion on a graphic design level, right? This is less about the mood I'm going to capture and more about making my photograph harmonious with the design elements. Let me show you. Here's classic long exposure. Here we go, right? A seascape, sea stacks, kind of a fine art feel to it. Gray day, let the water go really soft. Okay, that works. It's a nice image. I mean, just different ways. But then this is where you start to look at it more from like, what is in the image that is helping me? This image, we shot and shot and shot a bunch of different exposures on this scene. And what we came to realize was if we shot too long, all the beach line there, that edge, and a lot of the white water out below the spires, it just kind of rendered over itself and it was blah. As we shot shorter, and shorter meaning 4 seconds versus 10 seconds, we got more definition. And then we're like, and we need that. We got to have that curvy line on the front edge of the beach there. That's a really strong leading line that pulls the viewer through this. If there's something related to exposure time that's going to affect how strong that line is, that's important. And you start to think more about this. So like, oh, here's another great example. I could have shot this image at 15 seconds and the entire river would have just been a white kind of cotton mass. There would have been really no direction or texture at all to it. But shooting at a little slower shutter speed, it actually stretches that white water out and forms these great long lines, which is the perfect handrail, the visual handrail back into the shot. So I have started thinking about motion a lot different. I always traditionally was thinking more on a concept, mood kind of feeling to it. Now I also think that, but I'm also dialed into what's happening to the elements. Are they stretching out? Are they doing what I want them to do? Of course, there's more traditional ways where you're just trying to convey motion or energy by motion in your subject or motion in your camera. But here's another example. Shoot too slow and these diagonal lines turn into whitewash, but I want a diagonal line. A diagonal line has a lot of energy. This is a storm approaching in Glacier. It's the perfect supporting side note to the overall concept of this image. And shutter speed is very important in terms of how it's going to render. Same idea here, long exposure, let that water swirl around and create something a little different. Okay, so another one I really thought I would just bring out tonight is, we all know we are photographing a three-dimensional world, and yet it renders on 2D. It's on the computer monitor, you put prints in your office, it's on the front page of the magazine, whatever the case is. So typically anything that can convey depth and dimension in a photograph is a good thing because your subject has depth to it. If your image looks flat, it's flat. So what can we do? There's so many things that can help us with that. Shadow, silhouette, framing, all these things that are going to add some depth and dimension to it. Look at an image like this, classic street photography, right? This is in Cuba. This guy kind of wearing that classic Cuban kind of fedora looking hat. It's perfect. It's like, there's the car, which sets the iconic sense of place, Cuba, but then there's this hint of this guy and this whole other dimension in this photograph. It's all by way of reflection. So I try to think about that in my work all the time. Contrast and warm advances off of cool. There's relationships in color and light that also convey depth in an image. I mean, why do we always bump contrast in Photoshop? You know, you're trying to make your image have more depth. That's really what contrast is about, right? Think about it. You're trying to make it look like it has more dimension. Well, in the field, warm, guys all know Stanley Kubrick, some of those classical movies, he always had these warm scenes on cool backgrounds. He knew that on the big screen, people would just come out and like practically serve you popcorn in your seat. So think about these ideas in your photography. Framing is easy to wrap your head around. We're teaching a travel photography class right now, and I've done a lot of shooting for travel magazines. And I had an editor tell me this one time, it was the best bit of advice. He said, listen, when you're in Europe and you're shooting all these squares and plazas and stuff, the only thing you have to remember is work the edges. And I'm like, work the edges? And he's like, think about it. All the tourists and everybody's going to be out in the middle shooting back at the buildings and this and that. But so many of these plazas have kind of cloister awnings or side streets. So many original images can be found photographing from the edges, maybe through a doorway on the edge. And his whole point was, it's a unique view, and you also are adding a dimensional layer to it. You're not just standing out in the middle of the plaza shooting at the statue. It's like, no, shoot through the archway into the plaza at the statue. Now you've made an interesting photograph. So framing, obviously, you get a dimensional flavor to this. Love El Cap, always trying to find a new way to photograph it. I don't know if there is one, but I just like an excuse to roam in the woods. It's like, yeah, I'm just going in with my camera. See ya. Reflections are a great one. They kind of are windows to this other part of the scene that we can't see. So it definitely has a dimensional quality to it. We love rainy days, right? Puddles everywhere. You're going to get interesting photographs. Another one with dimension is vanishing point. Pretty simple concept. Something starts wide in the front of the frame and pinches off in the back, and it has this illusion of just depth that goes on forever. And this is an easy one that you can just kind of apply it when you walk out the door on your next photo trip. And of course, we think a lot of man-made things, roads, docks, bridges. Palouse, if you've ever been out there, I love this shot just because of the dimensional feel to it. So much died into vanishing point here. This road starts wide, pinches off, and it just looks like it goes on forever. But it also works with other things. This kayak and how it pinches into the bow, that's playing on dimension by vanishing point. Looking up an aspen trunk, it's wide at the base, small at the top. Vanishing point. So I know for me, a lot of these concepts, I think I maybe subconsciously had a handle on them, but it wasn't until I learned about them or read about them or was taught them that then I'm like, oh, I get it. And so that's why that does that. And then you don't forget it. You're like, let me try this. Desert Southwest. Sure, you guys have been over there. Same idea. Okay, here's a great one. Shoot in black and white. So I was a journalism person back in the day, and it was all black and white film. That was kind of what we were taught in. And so I started there. I don't shoot black and white anymore, but I still make a point of shooting black and white once every few months. And here's why. Hands down, black and white makes you see the world differently. And I can't tell you the number of folks that we've had on workshops or we've given assignments online. They're like, I don't like black and white. Here's the cool, good news. Most of the newer digital cameras allow you to set your camera for black and white. It may be called monochrome. It's going to depend on your brand, your menus and all that. But if you're photographing in a raw format, at least with the Nikon, I can go out into Old Town Fort Collins, shoot black and white, get real-time feedback on the back of my camera in the field. Very important. And then when I come back and put those images in the computer, they still pop up as color. All that's happening is the camera is generating a little monochrome black and white preview for me to look. But we always worry that, oh, we want to shoot in color and convert in black and white. Well, you can do that in the camera and still have the best of both worlds. It doesn't work if you bring images back in color and convert them to black and white. I promise you will see things differently if you're looking at your LCD or whatever, however you're previewing your images in the field, and black and white makes you see things differently. There is no bias of color. You are forced to look for pattern, texture. I mean, I am always astounded when I just go to Old Town Fort Collins. I mean, we live here. I'm down there every day. I roam around and I just imagine I'm like in New York City. I'm like, all right, I got to find something interesting here. Set my camera to black and white. And every time I come back with a shot and I'm like, God, who knew? I mean, this is just, it's amazing. This is my backyard. And yet I just put the goggles on, and then when I go into black and white, it just puts me over the edge. So one of your self-assignments is try shooting in black and white for a day. And you got to promise me this. You guys have to do it at the camera level, because you want the process in the field taking the picture. That's where you're going to learn, not coming back and converting. I mean, sure, you'll pick up some ideas for sure. Not to say that that's not I mean, that's how we do most of our black and white after the fact, of course, but it's just very helpful, I think, to be seeing it and getting real-time feedback. I just am blown away. Like image, here's an example. This was a shoot, pinup. We did a pinup girl for a magazine. And of course you think pinup, it's like bright lipstick, pink, kind of that 50s diner kind of feel to it. And to me, that hinges on color. That's very much a part of the art direction and the concept. Just for the heck of it, I'm like, I'm going to convert this one to black and white, but I know I love color better. And then I moved it over to black and white. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to blow this thing up and put it in my office. It's like, who knew? And it's just that revelation and discovery that unless you try, you're not going to know. So give it a shot, you guys. Try the black and white. Okay, emotion, so key. I think almost every successful photograph has an emotional component to it. And if you're a landscape person, you may be saying, but you know, the mountain doesn't smile. True. But the sunset, the colors, the line, all that creates an emotional response. So go back to color theory. If you're a landscape shooter saying there is no emotion in the landscape, and read about what orange and red and blue and purple, how those affect the human sight. They get an emotional response. Certainly with living things, you get it. Whether it's Tango in Buenos Aires or it's a puffin learning how to fly that's going to come in for a crash landing, or these were these random sheep, right? I just thought this was the funniest photo. It's kind of like they look so guilty, like I didn't do it, he did it, I didn't do it. I mean, who thought a sheep photo? And of course, you know, there's easier things to put a finger on in terms of emotional level. Landscape shots, right? This is a conceptual landscape. It's emotional landscape. It's hope, new beginnings. It's flooding backlight with some fog and steam, stately, regal redwood trees. There's so many things here that are creating an emotional response, even though it's a landscape image. Of course, my favorite, Denali. Okay, don't do this. I do it all the time. You know, I'm a technician at heart. I love my little lighting toys and rigging up stuff. And I mean, I don't even care if I get the photo. As long as the rigging is cool, then, you know, oh yeah, right, we got to do the picture. You get a technically perfect picture. So that means you got the camera craft part of that creative triangle down, but you need to work on the vision and the graphic design part of things. This is a technically perfect waterfall, and it's just like, it's a snapshot, never going to see the light of day. Look for an emotion, figure out a shutter speed, look for dramatic weather, something that is going to engage your viewer and make them have a little bit more of a response to it. All right, hang in there, you guys. I know I got a lot to say. It's not too late. Photograph how you see and not what you see. This is like the best statement, I think. I think of this all the time. You line up 10 photographers all pointing at the same scene, and I bet you get 10 different photos. To me, this is your license to apply your vision. This really goes to that vision part of that whole triangle idea. A hiking trip on the Slick Rock in Utah. Okay, there's the photo. I mean, there's some value to that picture if I'm shooting a story for one of the outdoor mags. Okay, great. But really how I see is the photo on the right. It's like, no. I got to come up with something that says arches and slick rock and hiking, but it can't be just some guys hiking across the slick rock. So it's not what you see, it's how you see. So, so important. Yeah, we all do the big air photos anymore when we go skiing or we're in the backcountry. Okay, that's fine. I mean, not to say one's better than the other. Maybe the client needs that shot. But to me, I'm saying, oh no, let's create a curving line with a multiple exposure. We'll seam it up in Photoshop, and we're going to do something much more interesting than just the big air photo. What you see, how you see. One more example. You know, we had one of the funnest assignments I ever had was paddling through the Exumas on this trip for a magazine. Loved it. It was really dreamy, although the paddling was a little sketchy in places. But anyway, here was this. And then I'm like, okay, the water is kind of cool. I mean, I like that shot on the left, but it's like, nah, they're not hiring me because I'm just going to stand on a point and take pictures of kayakers. They want something else. How else do I see the world? Well, let's get underwater and shoot something that shows it in a slightly different way. How you see, what you see. It's just so, so key. Okay, here's another good one. You guys, we had the coolest assignment. So we've been doing all these online classes. One of them was an advanced landscape class. And one of the assignments on that, and it's the same one I'm going to give to you, was we told everyone, we're like, hey, number one, and I'll ask you guys this question right now. How many of you can tell me, just thinking off the top of your head, what's the highest ISO that your camera goes to? Some of us may know that, some of us may not. Is it 52,000 or is it over 1 million? And then here's the real zinger. So you know the upper limit. How many of you have shot at your camera's highest ISO before? Right? I mean, we read the magazines, we're online. Oh, you can't go past 6,400 because it'll be too noisy and the photos are unusable. Well, so we gave this assignment to our class and we told these folks, we want you to go shoot images at the highest ISO that your camera does. Even if you throw them all out, it's going to be good to see what happens. This woman, she lived in like southern Missouri or somewhere that was in this class. She lived on a cow farm. And she's like, well, I'm just going to go shoot my cows. I'm like, oh boy, you know, I'm thinking to myself, I gotta be smiley here. Yeah, great idea, Sue. I'm like, thank God I live in Colorado. So she goes out and then the next day class comes up and they show us her photos. Oh my God. She shot all her cattles basically at like night. I can't remember how the ISO was over 50,000. I forget the camera she had. It looked like some mystical fine art work that would sell for millions at like Sotheby's or something. I was blown away. So was she. Of course, it was super grainy, and there's even some structural issues in the images, I think, but it looked incredible. It was fully abstract and out there. And I told her, I'm like, you know, can I send this in to like PDN for you because this is just plain cool. So you guys get it. ISO is a game changer right now. It is, you can shoot at 6,400. You can go out at night. We can do things that we have never been able to do before. And I'm just here to share my experiences with folks and say, listen, I got, you know, the Nikons here, we D850s, D6, all that fun stuff, the mirrorless. We're shooting at 12,000 and we're getting results that we can send into magazines. Now, it's going to depend on your camera. Earlier cameras may not have as good a noise performance, sensor size. You know, there's a few things in there that are going to weigh into this, but I just want you guys to think outside the box on what you read about ISO and find out for yourself. We had these eagles in Fort Collins this winter. They drained this pond and all these fish were flopping around. So I'm like, oh, this is a great COVID assignment. I would go down there at sunrise every morning, hang out, wait for the eagles to come in, shooting at 6,400 ISO almost every morning. And I did this whole photo essay, just a self-assignment of eagles at sunrise. And the images look great. I'm like, who? Everyone should be out here. It's not that dark and look at the sky. So anyway, enough said. I know you guys get it. Check out your ISO. Don't blow it off, and don't fall into what you hear. Learn yourself. I'm a huge believer in it's probably true, but let me just try it to make sure, because maybe I'll shoot a cow in Missouri and it'll wind up on the cover of PDN because I tried something different. Okay, here we go. Got a few more. Compress the scene. This one's easy. Big scene. Well, ask yourself, what's interesting in this photo? What am I really shooting here? Alabama Hills, Sierras in the background. It's overwhelming. The eye doesn't know where it's supposed to go. But Mount Whitney over there on the right with the clouds, I'm going to put on a longer lens and I'm going to go after something that makes more sense. There's the photograph in the scene. So, another term for this is optical extraction. This is an okay shot of the Badlands, but God, don't you love the foreground hills? That's really where the strong graphics are. So go in tight, compress, narrow your angle of view, make your subject matter bigger in the frame, compress, optical extraction. If you want the Moroccan to look like he's like overwhelmed by the towering Sahara Desert, you have to use a long lens for the portrait. A wide angle lens is going to make him big and the background really small. So don't forget basic camera craft stuff here. Okay, now here's another one. It's kind of a tech one. Say you want to shoot the slow-mo Clear Creek shot right outside your back door, but you don't have your ND filter. And you're like, man, I want to shoot at 4 seconds. I don't have an ND. It's too bright to get there. What can I do? Use multiple exposure. Do a 3-frame multiple exposure at whatever the slowest shutter speed is. And this is what it looks like. This is 3 frames at 1/5 of a second. Because the camera puts them together over one another, it kind of merges and bleeds over. It looks like a long exposure. A slick little tip. It's multiple exposure is something that I've started to use all the time. You need a tripod, or you better be really steady on your hand. Otherwise, the frames won't merge evenly. There'll be some ghosting going on. This was a train station in Porto, in Portugal. And I'm like, it's so frenetic in here. What can I do to convey the energy of this place? I'm like, I got to show these people, but they have to be moving. Didn't a slow shot just kind of blurred over itself? But then I tried an 8-frame multiple exposure. I'm like, this is perfect. Now, the weird thing in this, I don't know who that guy is in the pink. He did not move for like 3 minutes while I'm clicking through this. Still kind of wigs me out. I'm not sure what his deal was. You could read into this guy a lot. I'm like, he didn't move and everyone else did. Don't ask me. Over in Japan and Tokyo, the intersections go green light, red light, and there's like 5,000 people that seem like they move positions. So great time to try multiple exposure to try to show that craziness that goes on there. And then there's softer scenes too. This was a 3-frame multiple exposure in Iceland. I just love, this is completely unscripted. These tourists, they take a picture of each other. I took 1 frame and then they came together and looked at the shot, and I did 2 more pictures. So they rendered a little bit darker, but I just love that it's like a chimera ghost. It's just like, are they really there or are they not? And it seems to lend itself well to that shot. This is multiple exposure over in Uray. Stretch out those clouds. Do 3 long exposures. Watch this cumulus clouds come together in a long streak versus, a single frame where they won't. It just works. Same idea. So try it out. You can also just do a little more abstract work here. This is just rotating my camera, looking at a group of flowers, 10 frames. You kind of make these kaleidoscope things. Who doesn't want to do the double exposure selfie, right? We actually had this assignment this summer for Nikon, and we were all stuck at COVID. And so we got some great jobs from them because like, it all has to be shot at home. I'm like, thank God, I don't really want to go to the other side of the planet. Can I just do it in my garage? That's where I shot this one. So we started talking about multiple exposures and double exposures. I just don't think it was kind of like a party trick for the longest time. Now it is a legitimate tool in your camera to help you solve issues, create concepts. There's a new world out there with this. We have a German Shorthair Pointer. It was hilarious. All the dog wants to do is eat. So we laid all these dog bones on a piece of white seamless, shot that, and then did a portrait of her really quickly. And then the camera put them together. I'm like, this is my favorite one. All right, give it a shot. Few more. Scale. How many of us really think about scale? So here's the redwoods. We know they're big, but you have no context. It's just, and honestly, it's kind of a sleeper. But put a person in the picture, now there's tension. It's like, whoa, this person is very insignificant to the trees around him. My eye goes to the person. He's looking up. I look up. Of course, I put my camera on a tripod all the time and run into pictures if I'm hiking by myself. But think about this, you guys. Try to play on scale and think about what it can do, especially if you're a landscape or travel photographer. How big are these dunes? We'll never know until we put people on them. Now there's tension. Before it was more abstract art, but put people in there and like, whoa, there's a whole different reaction in the viewer when they have that scale and context to it. Same idea here. Now, it doesn't always have to be people. Somebody's from Alaska in that group. So this is right where we lived in Palmer. I still see photos like this and I'm like, why aren't I living up there? But then you remember what it's like in February when there's like 40-mile-an-hour winds blowing off the Knik Glacier and you're like, that's right. That's why we're not still up there. But anyway, scale. Barns look tiny. It's just a long lens with actually a really big mountain, but it looks even more so just by that long lens. Negative space is a great thing. I love negative space in travel, in landscape, in portraiture. It gives the image an unsettling feel to it. You have all this space. It might have clouds, maybe just a solid color, but it creates tension with whatever the subject is that's very insignificant in there. So another great one to run on. Two more. Perspective. You're like, yeah, been there, done that, right? We all know perspective, but do you really? I mean, I've been shooting 30 years and I'm still figuring it out. And it helps me to stop and say, wait a second, what can I really do at the camera to convey what I'm trying to say? So let's take a look at that. This was a hilarious photo. At least I thought so. It was a group we had, and I was telling them about, perspective and your view of the world and get low and all this. And so they did. And I'm like, oh, it's like the Darwin shirt. It's like standing, kneeling, and lying. I'm like, hilarious. It's like perfect. They've reached nirvana. They're lying down and they have a fresh perspective. So you see all these cattle in Scotland. So this is the snapshot, the 50-millimeter photo, right? It's okay. But that's not doing your job as a photographer. They're kind of funny looking. They're definitely an iconic part of your travel portfolio. You got to do something cool with these. Well, so how about put a wide angle lens on and just get a foot off the face of one of these cattle? Well, if you think wide angle, close to subject, if you're a portrait person, you're never getting close to a portrait with the wide angle. This is kind of going back to where other genres cross over, and it's good to try different things. Even if you don't think you're going to like it, you may learn something that'll help you in something else. And so the whole idea is, let's just make this over exaggerated, an enormous head. And it's like, this is like the punk rock hairdo, right? So you want to emphasize that. So wide angle lens, get up close. This isn't going to cut it to stand behind the fence and shoot with the 50-millimeter. Lie down on the dirt, make you insignificant to the cow. I'm putting this cattle in a position of power now. It's another play with portraiture and angles and what you're trying to do with it. We get the CEO headshot, right? I'm sure you guys have done these. Like, oh boy, they always want to, it's the whole power thing when you go in the office, and that's what they got to convey. Get below them. Okay, but anyway, you guys get it. More simple ideas here. The bears in Alaska, at so many of these places, they're so okay with people. I wouldn't say the word habituated, but they're very aware, and they're generally not going to be an issue, right? The generally is the key operative word there. But if you have an opportunity like this, you are not going to stand on your tripod and shoot this bear. You got to get low, because you don't really get to shoot bears like this that often. And you can get a perspective an inch off the dirt. Now the claws are front and center. It's a completely different picture. It's much more intimate. It's kind of relying on that more tried principle of, becoming one with your subject. If it's a little kid, you get low, or, you want to be one-on-one. You want to record. You're not photographing the bear. you're photographing your relationship and perspective to the bear. It's not what you see, it's how you see, remember? So here we go. Tension, always a good thing. Engage the eye. That's what when I say tension, I'm just trying to think of a way that I want the viewer to like be excited about my picture. So I'm going to give them a visual handrail. They're going to go down the green arc. They're going to look at the direction of travel here, and there's tension here. There's this anticipating moment that's going on. So tension is important in images. You don't want a sleeper photo. The worst thing that can happen when you send in images to like an editor is they're like, yeah, they're okay. You're like, disaster, what did I do wrong this time? And then you start to get more specific with it. And they're like, we need to engage the viewer. That is the operating word there. And if they're just flipping through the pages, you didn't do your job. So create something that gives visual handrails. There's tension, there's eye movement. We're not just lost in the photograph. Here's a real simple example. I'm sure you guys have all been to Maroon Bells. Have you been there recently? Oh my God, we were there 2 years ago. I'm not kidding. There was like 400 people along that lake at like 5 in the morning. We thought we'd get up all early. We were like the last people there. Woo, it is popular. So we all have pictures of Maroon Bells like this. What I love about this picture is one thing, that cloud. Without that cloud, it's a nice photo, but there's nothing unique to it, at least to my eye. Add that cloud in there and the eye is further moving through this shot. Yeah, it sees the aspen, the orange glow, but then that top part of that frame has just a little thing that creates a little more movement for me to explore. So tension, just the simplest of things, going along the front of the boats. All right, you guys, I'll leave you with this last thing. Personal projects are just, I can't say enough about it. Maybe you just like to take pictures, and so everything you do is a personal project. I mean, that's awesome. I almost wish sometimes I could get back to those days because I get so focused on like, the whole career thing, and I don't know if it's that healthy, honestly, but I have lots of personal projects. Let me show you one. One thing I would tell you as a forefront to this is this. The process, I honestly think the process is more important than the end result. Even if the photos are terrible, the fact that you were trying something different is on a long-term level is hugely important. I can't tell you the failures that have helped me get to the couple pictures that came out. So don't forget that. So here's my last little story for you guys. So I'm the climber guy, right? Oh, he's the climbing photographer guy. So I got Ellen Chrome, who we've done a lot of assignments through the year. They called me up one time and they said, hey, we want you to shoot a wedding. I'm like, oh no, I don't do weddings. They're like, no, a wedding. I'm like, nah, no. There's so many other guys out there that do that so much better. I'm not doing a wedding. And they're like, but if you were doing a wedding, what would you do? And me with my big mouth, all that I could say was, well, you know what? I'd probably shoot them on the edge of a cliff. They're like, cliffside wedding, brilliant concept. I'm like, brilliant concept? No, I see epic near-death experiences. Oh no. So here we go. Load up the gear. Let's find the cliff, and we got to make the cliffside wedding. So this was the funniest shoot. And this is my personal project, exploring lighting and maybe keeping my mouth shut. So I had to find 2 people that were married, except they weren't married. These are my 2 climbing friends here in town. They're like dirtbag climbers, have no money, live in their truck. And I'm like, hey, you guys want to like go hang out on the side of a cliff for 8 hours and act like you're getting married? And they're like, dude, but then I'm like, listen, I can pay you a lot. I mean, there's a big budget on this thing. I'll dump this modeling fee. I'll write it in like you guys are like supermodels. So like, oh yeah, we're in. Climbers are always like, do we get like a new pair of climbing shoes? Yeah, you're going to be able to buy a few pairs of climbing shoes. So they were on board. So now I don't know about you guys. I've never really gone into like a bridal shop. I mean, yes, I'm married, but I wasn't like part of that process, and I don't know anything about it. So dirtbag number 1 in the green shirt, dirtbag number 2 and 3 that are now in the wedding attire, we all go walking into this bridal shop in Fort Collins. We're in ratty tank tops and all that. And I'm like, hey, I got the card, right? I got the budget here, so I can do anything in the shop. It's really fun when you spend other people's money. And I'm like, these guys got to get suited up here for suited up. You can see like I'm really in the know here with the whole wedding thing. I'm like, they got to get suited up for a wedding. And I'm like, oh, and so there's all these women that come out and they're just fawning over Corey. Corey's the gal here. And they're like, oh, here, come back into the room, Corey. We're going to try on some dresses, blah, 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 blah. And Zach, this other guy, we're just hanging out. They're like, oh my God, this is like epic. Can you hurry up? So like 20 minutes later, Corey comes out of the back room. She has makeup on, her hair's been done. She's in this dress. It's kind of like one of those cinematic movie moments. I couldn't speak. Zach, I looked at him and it was like the blood was scrolling out of his face. And Corey comes out and she's like, well, I mean, there might as well have been little white doves flying around her. I'm like, oh my God. And Zach's like, oh my God. And Corey's like coming out and she's all pretty. I'm like, oh my God. So then we bring her over and I'm like, yeah, we'll take that dress. It's a very expensive dress. And the first thing that we do is we get out scissors and start slicing through it in the store. And the people are about ready to pass out. We're like, well, she has to wear a harness underneath this thing. We're going to tie a rope through it. And they're like, oh my God. I'm like, sorry, here, I'll buy it. I promise. So anyway, where's this all going? So we get this huge shoot set up. Corey and Zach are super excited. We get a crew. They send out a video crew. We did it at Horsetooth, which was really convenient. Some of you, I'm sure, know where that is. And my wife was in there. Of course, we're all ex-climbers, so we're like, this is good. At least we know what's going on. The bride and groom are really good climbers, so I'm not worried about them falling off the cliff. The video guys, on the other hand, that's a whole nother story. But we're doing all these cool shots. And, you know, we spent literally 8 hours working this. Well, here's the crazy thing that happens. And this was like one of the final shots. The night before the shoot, Zach, I'm getting all these phone calls on my phone from Zach, night before the shoot. Never a good sign when you're working with talent. Yeah, you don't get to call me the night before the shoot. Just show up. So finally I call Zach back. I'm like, Zach, what's up? He's like, Tom. I'm like, no, don't tell me you're sick. He's like, no. He's like, do you remember when Corey came out of that back room in that wedding dress? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I never thought before, but I'm going to actually ask her to marry me on the shoot tomorrow. I'm like, oh, no, you're not. You are not going to ask her to marry you on my photo shoot. It's like, do that on your own time. He's like, no. She just looked amazing. And I just was flooded with emotion. I'm like, don't tell me these sappy things. It's like, we got a photo shoot to do. He's like, dude, I'm going to do it. And it's like, when I asked her the question, you cannot have any of the film crew there. I want it to be a private moment. I'm like, oh, that's going to be easy with 14 people running around this cliff and you want to go hide behind a boulder somewhere? Oh my God. So anyway, Zach was a mess the entire day. Corey had no idea. He's about ready to fall out of his harness because he can't see straight. He's so nervous. Anyway, we got the shoot, everything went, and then we broke down the whole set. We started to pack up, go away. I looked over my shoulder. There were the kids. I took one shot. This isn't even with the camera. This is with my cell phone. When he popped the question, of course, she accepted. They went off to be, when I called Elm Chrome and I told them the story, oh my God. They're like, oh my God, you can't make this stuff up. I'm like, no, I know I can't make this stuff up. They were thrilled. But if you're interested, by the way, in this whole thing, all you have to do is Google Tom Bols Cliffside Wedding. And the videos are still all out there from the film crew on the whole thing. And now you'll know that they actually did get married. But all right, you guys, I hope you got something out of that. I know you guys got a ton of experience, and I just try to throw out some ways of maybe seeing differently. And some of you guys are probably like, I've heard all this before. This is who I am. And I am super open. I'd love to hear from folks. And if you got a question or on something I talked about, or if you're a Nikon shooter and you saw the Z9 announcement today, I got the inside word. Just send me these questions. There I am. By the way, if you are interested in online classes next week, we still have a couple spots left. It's the last online classes, and then we're finally going back out into the field and on assignments, hopefully. Anyway, I will stop sharing here and come back to you guys here.